thank you so much for joining us. I'm going to quickly go over a couple housekeeping things. First of all, hey, this presentation is going to be recorded. So if for some reason you must leave us, it will break our hearts, but that's okay. We're going to send you an email following the presentation. You're going to have a link back to the recording. You can watch it anytime. It's good watching. You can watch it in the evening as you're eating your dinner, or send it over to your bosses or other people that you think might be interested in the conversation that we're having. So if you have to leave, don't worry, you're going to get that. Second, if you have any questions throughout the whole presentation, please toss them inside the questions box over there on the right side. We'll get them put in there, pepper them in if they're relevant to the conversation at hand right then and there, or if they're better for the end, I'll wait till the end. But we'll definitely get them answered as best as we can. If we do not have time to answer all the questions or answer your specific question, we will follow up. We'll make sure that we're able to put it in the follow-up email. Say, hey, this question was asked. Here's the answer. I just want to make sure that we're getting to everybody's stuff. We're going to go ahead and get started in about 30 seconds, and we'll have a good time. Okay, gentlemen, you ready to go?
Yeah.
Excellent. Let's get started with this fun show. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for joining us for the Critical Mass Roadshow. My name is Richard Mellick. I'm the Director of Product Marketing for Threat Intelligence over here at Imperium. I will be moderating this conversation. Luckily, we've got two amazing people in the room. Krishna, please introduce yourself to the wonderful folks.
Thank you, Richard. Folks, my name is Krishna Vishnubutla, and I am responsible for our mobile app security product portfolio at Imperium, and I'm looking forward to the conversation today, Richard.
Excellent. Tom, say hello to these beautiful people.
Hello, everybody. I'm Tom Brown. I'm one of the solution architects here, and I'm hopefully here to add some color to the conversation. Looking forward to it.
Yeah, apparently I'm the only one wearing color, though, today. That's okay. The quick agenda of what we're going to be talking about, we're going to be talking about the threat landscape surrounding mobile applications. We're also going to talk about what our threat research shows. Now, I want to highlight this because this is my area. This is our research. This isn't research coming from the outside world. This is our own internal telemetry data. We also want to educate you on the risks that enterprises are focused on and why and where these challenges are arising. And ultimately, of course, we want to tell you all how we are able to help out. But let's go ahead and get started about the threat landscape. I love this quote. Krishna, through 2022, mobile application security failures will be the biggest mobile threat for enterprises. Gartner said this. We've been saying it for a long time. Krishna, what are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, and most of us are not surprised by this, right? I mean, I look at my phone. There are about 150 applications. Everything from health to banking to wellness to work is on our phones, right? We want to do everything on our phone via mobile applications. So these applications are packing a lot of features, right? I mean, 10 years ago, I remember an app used to do one thing. Now it seems like the app does 10 things. So more features, we love them, but that means more code, and just the attack surface keeps getting bigger and bigger. Just insane.
Yeah, Tom, from a solutions architect perspective, I mean, you're playing with these features and you're breaking some of them in the wild. What, from your perspective, what is it? What is this impact to the enterprise?
Well, I mean, a lot of devices. I mean, what is it? I think Krishna could probably correct me on the statistic, but I want to say it's every time I look at it, it's a little higher. Somewhere over 60% of mobile of work in the business area realm is done on mobile devices, and as he said, all these apps have people running privacy on the app. There could be sensitive data, all of these things. And even though companies may have things like an MDM, there's nothing out there that's looking at threat telemetry on a device. There's no one looking at hey, is this device doing something it shouldn't? Or is the device compromised while the app is running? So these are kind of some dangerous things we see out in the wild. And right now, about 3% of the devices are covered with some type of threat analytics, looking at the device for people that are accessing corporate data. So,
the one thing I'd like to add to this one as well is that with the rise of BYOD inside these enterprises, the likelihood that you're going to be installing an MDM on a personally owned device is very low because, of course, it's your own device. You don't want a corporate entity to manage your device, to have control over it. And so with BYOD, you're also inserting a lot of attack surface that is unaddressed, unmonitored. And the applications themselves could be potentially under attack by something that someone else installed. That's always a big threat to this, and clearly it's in the news. Tom, do you want to speak to kind of what we've seen in 2021?
Yeah, I mean, we've seen lots of different attacks, devices that have been, hit with 0-day attacks. That people might be running apps all over that device, but that device is hit with 0-day attacks. Pegasus has reared its ugly head again constantly on those iOS devices, but specifically around the apps too. Some of these apps have bugs left in them, so there's these updates constantly. So I think Krishna could probably add more here, but I mean, we're seeing it constantly, and it's not slowing down. We're seeing more and more apps that are running on bad devices, also apps that might have vulnerabilities in them that the developers may not have been aware of or didn't think of when they were building them.
Yeah, and and it seems like there's a new hack or a new breach every day, Richard, right? Can't keep up. But I think when we look beyond some of these headlines, I think at a very fundamental notion is, all these apps that we have access a ton of sensitive data and access critical systems, right? That's how they're able to provide so much of value. So when something is not built right, whether it's the developer, trying to build cool features or whatnot, these things are going to happen. We're introducing millions of lines of code and building cool features, but these apps are, they're constantly processing sensitive data, which needs to be protected. They're sending this data off the app to several critical systems for the services they provide. So when there is a break in the app, it becomes a doorway to so much more. And that's what we're seeing behind a lot of these hacks is one app becoming a window into the enterprise, which results in a breach eventually.
Yeah, and what kind of breach are we talking about? I mean, we talk breach. It's not just impacting the customer or the end user, right?
Yeah, and I think that's the thing with apps, right? When we think about apps, let's say, payment apps or things like that. When a certain app gets breached, the first thing that happens typically is the attacker is able to get into that person's account, for example, right? So the first damage he does is to the end user. Let's say he's able to take over your account, transfer some money to himself if this is a payment app, right? But then as he unpacks the app, he understands how the app is talking to the back end, to the enterprise. And he can impersonate the app to start requesting data about other people, right? So it's not only immediately impactful to the end user, the app then gives them a recipe, right? You kind of see the defensive playbook of the enterprise. So now you can manufacture, whether it's malware or you can fake apps, right? You have the ammunition needed to abuse the enterprise. And that's the scary part.
Yeah, and the big impact on this is it's not just to your end user; it's also to your brand, your reputation.
Yeah,
I think about this one. We talked about this last year, but when it was bigger news, because it was slightly comical, but also really scary and revealing. Was BrewDogs. The BrewDogs app had their API key hard coded into the application, so they left the key to their front door right there in their app mobile application, and someone was able to access not just their user information, but their investors' information. All their critical finances was revealed through this one API that they didn't obfuscate, that they didn't protect against someone just looking at the code, and it can be a very interesting mindset. Tom, is there anything you want to add to this? As you're seeing this kind of play out in the world.
Yeah, I was going to add that, you guys hit on a couple of things, but kind of diving into it a little bit deeper. If someone has the ability to get into the app, they can rebuild the app and then dump it on a third-party app store. You don't know that you're downloading an app that could be what you think it is. Maybe it's your medical app, right? But it's actually a fake version of that medical app. Now you run that app and now it pulls whatever it has access to off you, your personal information, and they can do that for hundreds of thousands, if not millions of end users, because they get that trick app out there that looks like your company. So you want to make sure that, protecting the brand is really important, right? Because you can get out there and not only affect take your data and make a fake app, but you're actually could potentially pull data off your end users, which is going to make your brand look bad.
Yeah, that's a really good point. It reminds me of when Fortnite was first released on mobile devices. We saw a lot of clones of it trying to bypass the paywall that was established, and some of those clones had malware embedded into them, impacting both iOS and Android devices. It wasn't just limited to it, and we see it especially outside of in areas where you might have firewalls or regional protections. So people will be seeking out side-loaded applications of your application to bypass, limitations that they can't download from an official repository. That's a really good thing. Really good news for everyone to be aware of. The research goes to show that the apps aren't secure, right?
Yeah. And this one's really interesting, right? Because I think when we talk to enterprises, the first thing that always surprises me is they don't think as code as IP all the time, right? We associate intellectual property with secrets and then the brand and the logo and other things, but they don't necessarily think of the code as intellectual property, but it is. I mean, especially if you are in banking, think about how you're competing. In the US, at least, the top 15, 20 banks have over 100 features in an app. And now people are choosing banks based on what can they do in their mobile app. Because I don't want to be dragged into a branch. Who has time for that? So every new feature becomes a competitive differentiation of why someone should choose your bank. So then if you are in this space, you've just spent 9 months and $1 million building a fantastic differentiated feature. And if you don't protect your app, within a day, your competitor can look inside your app and pull that feature into his app. Just copy your code, and now you've lost your competitive differentiation, right? But that sometimes isn't intuitive. But that's what's happening in the world of apps, and especially you look at healthcare, banking, payments. These are hyper-competitive business environments.
Mm-hmm.
But the awareness isn't quite there yet as to why it's so important to protect your code and your app.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I'd love to also focus in on one thing: the runtime protection lacking. You're talking about banking and financial applications. We recently published a report on the mobile banking heist, the targeted attack against banking Trojans. And in that report, we broke apart, I think it was 8 to 10 banking Trojans, and we found 650 banking apps, mobile banking apps on a global scale that were targeted by these banking Trojans, like actual targeted. Tom, dig into that. Like, that's the future. The banking app is making the mobile device an ATM for our critical data.
Correct. Yeah. And if you're not looking at real-time telemetry, you could deal with all kinds of fraud, So having the ability to protect your app out in the wild, you don't know what device it's running on. You don't know what other apps are on that device, right? So having the ability to have some visibility into that and say, hey, if a device is jailbroken or a device is sitting on a man-in-the-middle attack or some type of, ARP table or SSL decryption type attack, you want the ability to kind of get into that. So potentially you could, stop the app or make the app read only, things like that. So you could stop fraud type transactions. I think that's really, really dangerous. And we've had a lot of major banking companies that have been able to help with that. And we're able to kind of eliminate some of the fraud that they've seen in the millions of dollars range.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, the fraud aspect is big because who's liable for fraud? Who pays for it? At least here in the United States, we know the United States laws. It depends on your country, but if fraud occurs, who's liable for it? Who's paying for that?
Yeah, and that's where a lot of this changes, right? Right here, since the banks are liable, the consumer really doesn't care transacting on a poor, unsecure Wi-Fi or on something that he shouldn't click on because he knows he's not liable, but banks are. And the banking, and I'll extend that to payments as well. And this leads back to the vulnerable encryption stuff we see here, right? If 50% are using vulnerable encryption, But the larger concern with encryption, I think people say, is they believe if they use encryption, they're safe. It's really not true.
Mhm.
What we are learning when we talk to a lot of customers, when they think encryption, they always, the good part is they choose a robust algorithm, right? They choose like a massive vault that's great. But then they don't have good hygiene around encryption. They don't implement it properly. They rely on a secure enclave or a key store on the mobile devices, and they assume they're always safe.
Yeah.
That's really not true, right?
There's,
On the mobile device, if your device is compromised, there's really no place you can hide in the hardware, especially.
and as we paint this doom and gloom, you hit on something. My research team was recently looking at the encryption standards being used in some of the most prolific apps that we were looking at. I can't remember the category. I think it was the financial application. And they found that some organizations were actually using encryption standards that were 10 years old and
Yeah.
had known breaches that had been hacked because they
Yeah.
were not up to modern standard. But they were just applying encryption. It was a checkbox. We have encryption. Check the box, right?
Yep.
And that does set people up for it sets up not just the end user for failure, but it's setting up the organization for failure because they're not applying a security mindset to every single aspect. There's that the idea is that we don't trust our own employees to not do anything. That's why we have security training. That's why we have security products on the laptops and desktops that we issue out to our employees. But we're not applying a security mindset to the applications that we're deploying out to potential customers and prospects. And that's, we're opening our systems up to the breach. And just I love the survey that's coming up here. It's not just us that's talking about it, right? Like we did put out a survey out to through Gartner, the Gartner Product Pulse, to 270 technology leaders. When it comes to mobile application security in your organization, which three of the following tasks are you most concerned about today? This is one of our biggest turnouts for results in the survey that we asked into this group. Krishna, you want to talk to like these top three results?
Yeah. So, it's very encouraging, I think, when we did this to see that the concerns are in the right places, right? That's very promising. First one, if you look at it, data is secure, right? Especially for mobile apps, data moving from an app that's running on your device to somewhere to a remote server or a cloud, there is a lot of data to be protected, right? Whether it's at rest or in motion. Proprietary source code, what we just talked about, right? We don't yet see the level of protection in the app, but they are concerned about it. Right? So the awareness of these things is starting to rise. And then the third one, which has become a much larger issue recently after SolarWinds, is your supply chain risk.
Yeah.
Right? 70% of a mobile app is probably third-party code, right? But no one really thinks about how safe is it? What is the security posture? And now we're drawing a lot of attention to these things. So it's very encouraging that enterprises are focused in these right places.
Yeah. Now, Tom, do you want to talk to the other ones? Because I don't want to diminish those other four, compliance and regulatory. That's huge because, as we know, we deal with it every single day. Compliance standards in, one country are very different than what we see in other countries.
Right, and a lot of these apps have are all over the world. I mean, you don't have an app that's just for, let's say, New York, for example. If you have an app, it can be downloaded anywhere. So having the ability to look at all your compliance regulations, and you guys hit on a couple of things. I know Richard and Krishna both hit on this on the last slide. Is a lot of times when people are building an app, they need to get it out in a certain amount of time. So companies are getting better, but right now it's still like, hey, the security is a checkbox. Hey, there's certain things I have to do, but they're not specifically thinking about the security of the app and what kind of regulations that it needs to abide by. So having the ability to scan an app as you're building an app to be able to look at certain regulations, it may be GDPR, CWE, if you're dealing with the healthcare, if it's some stuff around Food and Drug Administration, those types of things. There's some ways to look at it and say, hey, here's some vulnerabilities in our app. So when I have to go to do a pen test on that app, and it's going to look at these regulations and figure out where I have issues potentially with encryption or level of encryption, things like that. Having the ability to say, hey, here's some things I need to fix, and being able to do that prior to doing the pen testing, that's going to speed up the reality is that people don't think about it, but if you do this stuff in the right order, then you can get your app out to the market quicker than if you just tell somebody, hey, this app has to be out next week, and you go to put it, you build it, and then all of a sudden you have to go into the pen testing phase, and then whoop. So if you have the ability to kind of speed that process up, you could potentially make your pen testing a much shorter task and cost you much less money, and be able to get that app out into the wild quicker and be safer.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I appreciate that, Tom. Real quick, we did just get a note in here. Your slides are not clear. If you are having issues seeing the slides, unfortunately, it's not something we control. That is through the BrightTalk system. The recording will have a HD 4K version. You'll be able to see and follow up on this afterwards. I'm so sorry if it's not working for you right now, but the recorded version will be high quality. Let's get into what Gartner's saying. I want to take this back to Gartner and continue on with Gartner, because Gartner is really pushing this conversation about the key challenges for the enterprises to this one. Krishna, take this on. Like, what's the biggest challenges that the enterprises are running into? It's not just, of course, as Tom said, getting it out to the market fast enough. It's a much larger security mindset, correct?
Yeah, and I think from an enterprise perspective, if we step back, right, enterprises have realized mobile apps, when done right, can lead to productivity and growth, right? And they have bought into this idea that we can make both of those things work. But mobile apps themselves, the way we build them, has evolved quite a bit, right? We have native, we have hybrid frameworks, we have hybrid architectures. So building a mobile app, you are forced to make a lot of decisions about how much data you want to collect, what type of architecture you want to use, what type of language you want to use. So it's a lot of decisions, and each decision comes with its own pros and cons, right? Which is why you see when Gartner talks about architectural implications, yes, there are, right? It's no simple feat to build a mobile app anymore, especially when these apps are doing more and more, right? We have these notion of super apps. They are doing more. For enterprises, it makes sense, right? Because there is a business driver behind building compelling apps. But that requires, a great UX, which means they have to collect more data and they have to write more code. So the attackers are seeing this endless attack surface that they can focus on. Developers are incentivized for building apps faster. So they're not really incentivized for security, right? I think enterprises are trying to equip them with the right tools so that they factor in security, but there isn't a big business driver for security. It is more business driven. You have to get the feature out faster, competitively win in the market. So apps have gotten more complicated. We're collecting more data. Incentive to get the app out faster, a lot more attack surface, right?
Yeah.
And it's kind of leading to this perfect storm that Gartner is recognizing here.
Yeah. You're bringing up a really good point. I think the next slide really hits on that, is where are these app risks emerging? We're talking about, it's not just because of a mindset. It's actually in, through multiple stages of development and deployment. Tom, talk to this, share where you're seeing, share the technical details, make us scared.
Yeah, so like we've hit on, right? During development, your app teams, like we said, are always just focusing on, getting this thing out there, and part of that is, sharing shared libraries and using open source code. But then they also have to, when you're putting the proprietary codes in there and sensitive data, you need to make sure that that's protected. And that's not always a thought that comes to mind. And I think Christian will probably add a little here too. But once it's published as well, these attackers, this is published out in an app store. So an attacker has the ability to spend unlimited amount of time figuring out how to get into the app, figuring out how the app works and being able to reverse engineer it, being able to steal keys or code from that app, maybe to use it to make a fake app, other use cases to kind of break into the app and maybe do some malicious things while a user's running the app. And then, when you're out in the wild, you don't know what device the thing's going to be running on. It could be running on a device that's completely out of date, running a very old operating system with multiple CVEs that are with open vulnerabilities.
Yeah.
People could be clicking on malicious links. They could be, having malware installed on their device. They might be running on a malicious network, like a rogue network, or like I mentioned before, man-in-the-middle ARP attack, or SSL stripping, those types of things. So all of that is really giving us the ability to kind of see, hey, there's 3 different types of risk here. It's during development. We don't know exactly the developer. We don't know if they're doing everything in the right order and actually thinking about security and what's going to go on once it's out in the wild. And then once it's published, who knows, what people are doing with that app, those attackers. And then out in the wild, while it's running, you need some threat telemetry to go, hey, Tom just tried to do a transaction when he was on a fake Starbucks network. Should I be concerned about that? Should I flag that as a fraudulent transaction? Should I crash the app? Should I make the app read only at that point? So those are some things to think about. And those are some things that, all this whole surface here is something that needs to be protected.
And Krishna, to what Tom just said, it's just seeing the threat telemetry. It's understanding the telemetry and understanding the threat to the enterprise, to the data, to the system, to the end user. It's under that. Talk to that. Like when we talk about the threat telemetry, we're not talking about having visibility into someone's phone. We're not looking at someone's customer's device. We're not saying that is the solution, right?
Yeah. So a lot of enterprises focus on the development phase, right? They typically are used to having a scanner which looks through the source code and says, oh, here are some vulnerabilities. That's what enterprises are used to. Mm-hmm. What they're not used to is their app running on millions of devices that they don't control, right? And they don't have any insight into whether the app is running in an untrusted environment, on a compromised phone, and is it capable of compromising the app and the enterprise? So when we talk about threat telemetry, what we're talking about is the ability for the app to recognize that it might be running on a risky or an unhealthy device, or if someone's trying to abuse it or exploit it, right? Like an attacker or malware on the device. That's the threat telemetry we're talking about. So enterprises love that, right? They would love to know if, like a banking app running on 30, 40 million devices, is someone trying to attack my app? Less about what's going on the device, to your point, but is the app being abused or tampered with? Yeah. Right? Because that way they can keep the end user safe and the enterprise safe as well.
Okay. So we've kind of hit on the problem significantly. There's clearly a situation here where, as more mobile devices are introduced into the enterprise, be it corporate owned, be it BYOD, on top of that, all the applications that are being sent out there. I mean, we're not just talking like applications you're selling. I just want to clarify on this one. We're not talking just the applications you're selling and deploying out to the App Store. We're also talking the applications your internal employees are using. That mindset. There are plenty of organizations that have internal only sideloaded applications. And if they are not protected against, the threats that exist, the increase in the threats, and ladies and gentlemen, the threats are getting more and more advanced. The 2 things I want to cover on a little bit more is the devices themselves. Without understanding what the device is that people are selling their application on, even burner devices these days are running outdated versions of iOS. Or what if they decide, the customer or the user purchases a device from an unknown or startup manufacturer that's using a compromised version of Android, or has sideloaded applications already in there. We see that quite commonly with less expensive devices. And then getting in there even further is these applications, they are the key to the kingdom. And if not protected, unfortunately, you're leaving the attack surface wide open, and it's a totally unaddressed, unmonitored attack surface when it comes to the enterprise security conversation. So, with that in mind, we've talked about the problem. Let's talk about the solution. How do we solve these problems? How do we start applying a security mindset to the AppSec conversation? Tom, kick us off here.
Yeah, like we touched on earlier, during development, we need to make sure that having some type of scanner that has the ability to look at any code that might be exposed that you might want to look at and maybe obfuscate, or at a minimum, at least make sure that it's secure. So having that type of a scanner, having some type of scanning capabilities that potentially would tie into your CI/CD pipeline would be very helpful, right? Being able to automatically open up a ticket to say, hey, by the way, you have some encryption here that is not that might violate a standard that you're doing, or at a minimum is not good enough to be out in the wild. And then, once it's published, being able to constantly make sure that someone can't reverse engineer that app, be able to make sure that it's obfuscated and that those keys are protected. For example, like and we're going to come up with some examples here in the next slide, but a good example of this is, like a gaming company or like a streaming service, having the ability to make sure that someone can't go in and grab the keys to that app and be able to leverage it in other ways. So having that, once it's published, being able to secure the app, making sure keys are not exposed, they're never in plain text, and then having that, a defense mechanism, really, right out in the wild while it's out running. You have some telemetry to say, hey, I may have an app that's running on 75 million devices, like we've touched on already, right? We don't know what operating system that device is, how old that device is, if it has malicious apps also running on it, if it's on a compromised network, those types of things, malware, clicking on phishing links, any of that stuff, right? So having that telemetry to be able to say, hey, I have some visibility into what's going on with my app out in the wild, so that there isn't issues with fraud or brand compromises, right? Things like that. So I think that's very helpful, and you really need to have all of these things in your arsenal to be able to be in a good state with your app, to make sure that your app is protected, make sure your app can't be stolen, can't be broken, and that there isn't fraud or brand your brand is being affected there.
Yeah. And Krishna, I think this is a great time. There's a lot of companies that are solving key aspects of this problem, correct? But Zimperium is the only one that's going to take you from development to deployment and apply a security mindset through these crucial stages to enable the enterprise, correct?
Yeah, that's right. Right. I mean, spot on. There are a lot of point solutions for the AppSec market, right? And the reason they're there is a lot of them are very good at doing one thing in one of these boxes, right? Either it's scanning, some form of obfuscation, or RASP, and they do it well. But the problem is a lot of enterprises have realized adopting siloed solutions, even though they're good, does not help them from an app security perspective, right? Because they don't talk to each other. There are gaps that fall through. So that's why our approach has been, how do you build an application security platform that allows you to do all these things and see all the risks in one place, right? You have to be able to take the risks that you're seeing in development, look at the risks you're seeing in runtime, and be able to make sense of it together, right? That will help you understand what security you need to begin with. I think you'll see a lot of enterprises, when we ask them, do you have security solutions? Yes. Do you know how you're being attacked? No. So it becomes meaningless after a point, because if you can't do any threat modeling, right, you can look at OWASP and look at some high-level guidelines, but it's really important for you to understand how your app is being attacked, where in the industry and in the geography that it's operating in. That will help you spend security money in the right place on the right tools. And that's what the platform allows you to do. It allows you to see what's going on, where the attacks are coming from, and also enable protections at the same time, which is very powerful in what the market is asking for right now.
Yeah. And that's really the crucial component of this, is that we're addressing the needs of this market. And this isn't something that we've just come up with. I hope that people realize we've been doing this for almost 12 years. Mobile security is what we do. It literally is our tagline. We secure mobile. And applying that kind of mindset to our customers, from the endpoints to the applications, is how we're driving it forward. Our customer case studies are crucial in this one. Please, dive into this. I'm going to throw it over to Tom to get it started, and then Krishna will come back to you on this one.
Yeah, I probably brought up a couple of these examples, but I definitely want to hit on healthcare, and I think Christian's probably going to add to this one too. But I think healthcare is really a main use case that we see a lot of, and it's actually a very strong growing, as well as the gaming industry is our two huge growing industries for us in this space. Just because when you have healthcare apps out there, a lot of these companies spend millions, if not billions of dollars developing an app, right? You want to make sure that your app is differentiated and your app is protected, because there's PII associated with it. You've got to deal with FDA. And you don't know what it's out there running in the wild. So having the ability to use these tools in a healthcare app is immeasurable. Similar with video games, right? So a lot of gaming companies make all their money off in-app purchases, right? And they want to protect their code inside those apps. So having the ability to protect the app and be able to obfuscate the code in the app and make sure that keys are never in plain text, so that someone can go out and sell stuff for them on the dark web, they lose a lot of revenue there. I'll just hit on those two. I'll let Krishna kind of add to that, and I'm sure he has some good conversations around the rest of this. But I think those are two that I'm coming across very commonly, outside of the banking one is an easy one for us, but healthcare and video games seem to be very high on my list of things that I've been talking to lately.
Yeah, and if you look at things like media streaming, wallets, right? All of us use a wallet, and biometrics. What we're seeing is a lot of the mobile apps in these industries have become central to their business model, right? So they need the apps to be safe and secure for their businesses to be successful. So anytime we run into a business where the app is collecting sensitive data, processing a payment, licensing some premium content, these businesses understand why it's so important to secure the data and the app.
Mm-hmm.
And these guys are coming to us because you can't just do open source at this point, right? The problem with open source is even the attackers have access to open source, right? Yeah. They understand how it works. So you need enterprise-grade security if your app is this central to your business model. And they're coming to us to say, help us protect our app, our keys, and our data. And a lot of this is mobile, but then when you get into cable and satellite providers, we're doing the same thing on set-top boxes. I mean, think about set-top boxes. All of us have Amazon or Apple TV, and all of these are doing the same thing. There are apps on these set-top boxes that are streaming content, and it's critical to their business. So that's what's driving these industries and companies to us. It's critical mobile apps central to their business, and they want to protect the data and their IP. And we're seeing more and more of that.
Yeah. There's something that you two keep hitting on, is you're protecting your data and IP. And there's a mindset that I like to apply to this. Malicious actors are just like bank robbers. They're after the money. Now, bank robbers are going after actual money. They're robbing the bank. But malicious actors these days, they're going after the data. And we as an industry, we as professionals out there need to think of our data as the money. Our companies have invested in the production of this data. They are investing in storing it, investing in keeping it protected in certain areas. But if we are leaving a channel open for it to be stolen, we are essentially, with the proverbial we, asking for our money to be stolen. We need to protect our money. And with that mindset, protecting our data. Tom, did you have something to add to that?
No, I was just going to piggyback off something Krishna was saying about going a little bit outside the mobile space. Yes, we secure mobile, but you mentioned the media streaming and cable, as well as the gaming industry, being able to protect. These apps are also running on things like Sony PlayStations, Xboxes. So it's really interesting to think about the app space, even though we talk mobile apps. Those mobile apps are all over the place, not just on mobile devices. They're embedded in some of these solutions like cable set boxes and gaming systems and media streaming devices. So,
I mean, they're all becoming a cohesive ecosystem, right?
Yeah.
I can play Xbox games on my iPad
Yeah.
through an Xbox application. I'm, not a sponsor, but that is one of those things that I, fully capable of doing. I can control the purchasing of all the apps or all the games that I have through a mobile device. I don't have to log into that, but it's all an interconnected system. And again, if we're just applying security to one and not the other, we are still leaving a massive gap in the attack surface. And that's why it needs to be addressed. There's a question that was asked, and I've been saving it. I've been wanting to ask it. It is a fantastic question. Tom, this is for you. Compared to desktop PC, mobile device sandbox architectures is more secure. This is the perception. Why is that perception wrong? Can you provide some feedback to that?
What was the first part of that? Sorry.
Compared to desktop PCs, so the traditional space, mobile device sandbox architecture is more secure. That is the perception that is delivered out to the world. Can you speak to that?
Yeah, and it's a interesting. A lot of people seem to think that, and it is different, but it's because the architecture is obviously different on mobile devices, right? So I can't run in the kernel, right? Yeah, I have to run in a containerized, especially in iOS, right? I have to run in a containerized space. I'm sitting on an app. But that doesn't mean the app doesn't have any visibility, and it also doesn't mean that these apps are attacked, right? So having the ability to, seeing out in the wild that people are attacking these devices in different ways is why you need to look at a company that focuses specifically on mobile, because it is different, right? But because things are containerized in mobile doesn't mean that it's more secure. There's a perception there that it is, but it's not. Anybody can take an app off the Android or the iOS store and go and reverse engineer it and go put it on a third-party app store, and people can get. And even more than that, I think the biggest attack surface right now is phishing. Right, phishing is a use case that's anywhere. So it doesn't matter if you're on a laptop or you're on a phone. And in reality, you see it more on mobile devices now. Mobile devices is a huge threat vector for phishing and smishing and users clicking onto malicious links, not only in email but also in their text messages, in WhatsApp, and these types of things. So having the ability to these attacks are happening outside of what the people are thinking. So, and I think Krishna has something to add here.
I was going to say, the sandboxing notion was well intended, right? Mm-hmm. Yes, if you allow. We're not going to allow apps to kind of interact with each other and stay in their lane, right? The intention was great, but over time, that has evolved, right? Even with things like Android intents, apps are now allowed to talk each other and share permissions, share data on the phone. So even though that's true, I don't think it's how it works. Yeah. Apps are able to talk to each other, and that's another area of abuse. Yeah. And once the device is compromised, all bets are off. Yeah. Simple as that.
Yeah. Right. Any underlying issues, even though the app is running kind of in its own lane, if a device is running on a bad network or there's malware on the device, that still happens. Escalation of privileges, jailbreak. The app can see that because it needs to be able to see that. So,
absolutely. We are coming up short on time, so I just want to quickly get to the next slide, but we do have a list of questions that we want enable you to ask your mobile security vendors, ask your mobile developers. These questions will be sent to you in a follow-up email, so you'll have this as a little bit of a worksheet, because while we provide a one-stop shop for application development security mindsets and applying multiple tools through one suite, we want you to go out there informed and educated to the problem, and you're asking the right questions. So we'll get this out to you as well. But there's a great thing that we're offering up here. Krishna, I want to talk to the free vulnerability scan and report.
Yeah. So for all of those who are if you're building a mobile application or someone's building it for you, we have a solution called Zscan, which essentially allows you to scan your binary, and it will tell you if there are issues, whether it's security, privacy, or compliance, right? We will give you a PDF report, and you can leverage within your organization. So if you're interested, we are happy to do this for the first few apps of interest. Just reach out, and we can definitely help you here.
Yeah, that actually answers one of the questions that just came in. Is there a site that rates mobile apps? How do they reach out, Krishna? Because it's you don't just come to our site and do this, right? You're reaching out. What do they need to do on that side? Are they going to see a link in the email?
Yeah, we will send you a link in the email that you can reach out. Once you tell us who you are, then we'll reach out with you and tell you how to access this report. So we will send you some information in the email.
Wonderful, wonderful. Okay, gents. Any last minutes? You got 20 seconds each. Tom, last minute thoughts on the spot.
Yeah, I just think based on everything we said, it's changing. I hope we were able to change some mindsets here a little bit, just to be able to kind of think inside. As you're developing apps, are you thinking about these 4 vectors that we specifically talked about? Like, are you scanning do you have regulations you have to abide by? Do you have any threat telemetry once it's out in the wild? Are you making sure that there's no exposed keys, or your device could be reverse engineered out in the wild? So as long as we can turn a couple of people's mind around to think of those things as you're building an app and putting that into your process, I think hopefully this was a successful and helpful presentation for you.
Awesome. Krishna, last 20 seconds.
I think it's important for everyone to go back and understand whatever solution you're invested in. Does it really protect you in those 3 stages? During development, when your app is sitting in the store, and when it's running on end user devices. And you need to have that clarity for yourself. So go to your AppSec teams or app dev teams and ask them, what are you truly protected against? I think that's where you need to start your journey on this AppSec piece.
Excellent. Excellent. Well, ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for joining us. We will be sending out a recording of this. If you have any questions, do not hesitate to reach out to us at info@zimperium.com. Go to our website as well. You can also reach out to us on social media. We are available on Twitter and LinkedIn. We appreciate everybody's time. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Richard. Thanks, Tom.
Thank you, everybody.